I call the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Dr. Ramanathan Raju. I'm the Senior Advisor for Intergovernmental Affairs and Health. I call the meeting to order. Staten Island Borough President's Office. I'm filling in for two co-chairs, Henry Garrido and Arva Rice. I want to thank Janice Margaret Manger, President and CEO of Staten Island Museum, and the staff, Rene Bouchal and Jean Richard Marquez, for hosting this event. Tonight, we will continue with the second round of public hearing taking place in all 5 boroughs. These hearings continue our efforts to solicit proposals from policy experts and public on substantial, effective amendments to city charter. The charter is our city's foundational document because the charter plays a vital role in establishing the structure and the procedures of city government. It shapes how decisions are made on a wide range of issues affecting everyday New Yorkers. The Commission has been empaneled to conduct a thorough review of the charter and craft proposals to put before the voters. This is our chance to create a better functioning city, one that is more transparent in its activities and more accountable to the people. It is an opportunity to make changes to ensure the city is less vulnerable to manipulation, corruption, or fraud. I know that all my colleagues take this responsibility very seriously. While this commission was convened by the local law passed by the City Council, we are an independent body. Regardless of the merits, any proposal that can be achieved by local law will not likely not up for our consideration. The Commission will not consider any proposal that weakens the local democracy or New Yorkers' rights. It is our first round of borough hearing, and through meetings with the community partners and organizations, we received many suggestions on what to change in the charter. Following that process, the Commission staff produced a preliminary report outlining several focus areas for our consideration, including government accountability, budget transparency, and land use. Our second round of hearings is concentrating on these topics, with each hearing covering one topic. We previously held hearings on budget transparency in Queens, and we'll hear some additional testimony on the topic tonight. On a final note of process, we are not the only commission reviewing the charter. The commission is distinct from the Charter Revision Commission convened by the mayor. Both commissions are working simultaneously but separately. Henry Isaiah Black is joining us today as a counsel. I would like the members of the commission to briefly introduce themselves. To my left.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Winston Griffith. I am appointed by Jomani Williams, the public advocate.
Rachel Goodman, appointed by the comptroller.
The commissioner is on the Zoom call.
Good evening. I am Henry Garrido. I'm also the co-chair of the commission. I am the executive director of District Council 37 in New York City.
Good evening, Rahul Agarwal, appointed by the mayor. I'm in private practice as a lawyer at Friedman Kaplan, Seiler, Edelman, and Robbins.
Rod Jones, and I'm the president of Goddard Riverside Community Center and appointed by the chair of City Council.
I need to finish up with the content archiving, and I just wanted to make sure that you've had plenty of time to do everything.
I think so.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Anybody else?
I'm Manny Pastorius, president of City Local 32BJ, appointed by the Speaker Adams.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. We now turn to the testimony portion of tonight's agenda, which will focus on the budget transparency. As the commission staff indicated in its preliminary report, there are a number of ways that the New York local democracy could be strengthened by improving budget transparency and accountability. This includes strengthening the independence of oversight agencies by establishing baseline investments, providing greater transparency into appropriations, spending, and revenue forecasting, clarifying when the mayor can halt spending approval by the city council, also known as impoundment, setting the rules of the road for adding to and withdrawing from reserves, and adding new voices and diversity to the council's procurement rulemaking body. At nearly $115 billion annually, New York City's budget is bigger than those of 46 states. The city has come a long way from the fiscal crisis of late 1970s when it was near bankruptcy. Today's strong revenues fund services and debt payments, and the city no longer runs current account deficits. As a result, the city bonds remain highly rated. Despite these improvements, our current fiscal framework has grown outdated. With a wide range of financial issues under the consideration, the Commission is interested in hearing more tonight about how can we update the charter to better support the city's economic responsibility to New Yorkers. Before we begin the testimony, I remind those in attendance that this is a formal government proceeding and the decorum must always be observed. As such, attendant members shall remain silent at all times. If you intend to testify today and have not registered to do so, we will accept registration up to first 30 minutes of tonight's hearing. Witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. Video recording or photography is not allowed from the witness table. At tonight's hearing, we will ask the folks to limit their testimony to 3 minutes. I'll let you know when your time is up. While tonight's hearing focuses on budget transparency, we welcome any testimony on proposed revision to the charter. I'm going to call the witnesses in panels. Commissioners are encouraged to ask questions based on testimony given, but I ask you that you hold your questions until each member of the panel has testified. Finally, I ask the witnesses and the commissioner speak directly into the microphone so that our Zoom attendees can hear you. I would like to invite the first panel of witnesses, Francesca Brindisi, Executive Deputy Controller for Budget and Finance, and George Swedding, Senior Fellow of the Center for New York Affairs at New School, to the witness table. Please. On Zoom. Oh, Francesca Brindisi is on Zoom. Okay, good. Thank you. Please introduce yourself before you begin, and we'll limit your testimony to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Am I going first?
Francesca.
Do you want me to go first? All right. Well, thank you, Chairs Garrido and Rice. I'm Francesco Brindisi and the members of the Charter Revision Commission. I'm Francesco Brindisi, the Executive Deputy New York City Controller for Budget and Finance, and I'm here to testify on 2 issues of relevance to the Commission: reserves and rainy day funds and consensus revenue estimates. I hope you can hear me okay. I submitted written testimony. I'm going to read choice passages to keep within the 3 minutes. We've done a lot of work on reserves, and you have a memorandum from our office that summarizes it. Our first proposal regarding reserves is for the charter to require a formula-driven approach to the size, deposits into, and withdrawals from the city's rainy day fund, the Revenue Stabilization Fund. We think that a well-thought-out policy is transparent, can be easily verified and evaluated, and avoids an overly rigid and prescriptive framework. As a related matter, there is confusion regarding what serves as a rainy day fund for the city, whether it's the Revenue Stabilization Fund or the Retiree Health Benefit Trust. We suggest that, given that we now have a true rainy day fund, that the purpose of the Retiree Health Benefit Trust is clarified, and the city considers accumulating money in the trust to pay for the accrued liability on retiree health benefits. Our second proposal concerns the Capital Stabilization Reserve. The city has a policy target of 15% of debt service over tax revenues. We are proposing that the charter institutionalize this threshold and devotes the Capital Stabilization Reserves to pay down debt service in years in the financial plans where the debt service exceeds 15%. Finally, on consensus revenue estimates, it is not immediately clear to me whether a consensus revenue estimate provides increased transparency and accuracy regarding the city's fiscal position. As to transparency, there are already 4 entities that provide alternative tax revenue and revenue estimates, alternative to both the City Council and the Office of Management and Budget. As to accuracy, the Charter and the Financial Emergency Act require that both revenues and expenditure estimates be reasonable and appropriate. Focusing uniquely on revenues disregard the systematic and increasingly worrisome practice of under-budgeting future years' expenses. Just for the FY26 budget, our office estimates that the city is under budgeting known costs by $3.5 billion. Accuracy cannot be one-sided or risk increasing spending without providing an honest accounting of expenditures. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. George Sweeting.
Good evening, members of the commission. I am George Sweeting, a Senior Economic and Fiscal Policy Fellow at the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School. Prior to my current position, I worked for over 35 years in city government, including over 2 decades as Deputy Director at the Independent Budget Office. And I retired a couple years ago from that position. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this process. I'll be submitting written testimony tomorrow. We've reviewed the recommendations of the very useful preliminary staff report to the commission, which includes numerous potential city charter changes that could improve budget transparency and accountability. I want to briefly discuss 3 of them. They actually overlap with what we just heard from Francesco in my testimony, and I trust that some of the others will come up in the Q&A. Units of appropriation are commonly referred to as the building blocks of the city budget. The charter currently specifies that each is to account for appropriations for a single program or activity. While there has been progress in breaking down some of the instances of overly broad U of A's, there's still work to be done on this front. Not only would this improve the transparency of the budget, but doing so would also increase the council's leverage in negotiating the adopted budget and modifications. This is because the charter limits increases or decreases in a unit of appropriation to 5% of the funds in the unit of appropriation at the start of the process. The OMB can move up to 5% of the funds in a U of A without going to the council for a modification. Smaller U of A's can make it more likely that OMB would need council approval before shifting funds between U of A's. U of A's better aligned with programs could also potentially improve the utility of the mayor's management report by making it possible to incorporate spending in service delivery indicators. This would require that program-aligned units of appropriation match the services and programs in the MMR. Building program or activity aligned U of A's is feasible, as shown by the budget function analysis included among the documents produced with each quarterly update of the city's financial plan. This work was originally undertaken by IBO as a demonstration project that involved granular work at the unit of appropriation and budget code level and required cooperation with OMB as well as the relevant agencies. Unfortunately, since 2008, when OMB took on the responsibility for the BFA, the analysis has not been updated, has not been extended beyond the original 15 agencies. On rainy day funds, as Francesco noted, it's only been available to the city since 2021. Establishing the RSF required changes to the charter and to the 1970s Financial Emergency Act. There are still steps to be taken before it can function like similar rainy day funds in many states. Currently, there are no rules that specify how and when deposits must be made, how and when funds can be withdrawn, and whether there should be targets or limits on the size of the fund. With the RSF in place, it's also worth revisiting some of the other reserves that are usually included when people discuss the city's reserves. Again, this is parallels Francesco's comments. The charter requires that the adopted budget include an appropriation for a general reserve, although it has no designated use. The general reserve is intended to be tapped if there is a fiscal emergency in the current year. Typically, the administration drains the general reserve over the course of the fiscal year to help cover current year needs. Any remaining funds at the end of the year are effectively rolled into the subsequent year. The charter requires that the general reserve start the year with a $100 million appropriation, although in most years the adopted budget has typically included $1.2 billion. The higher amount is justified given the growth in the budget since the 1980s. In reviewing the city's reserves, the commission should consider changing the charter requirement for the general reserve either to a higher but fixed amount or to a percentage of the adopted budget. Finally, with the establishment of the RSF, the city should move away from using the Retiree Health Benefits Trust as part of its fiscal reserves, allowing the RHBT to resume its intended purpose of accumulating assets to meet the future costs of retiree benefits. Prior to the RSF, a portion of the RHBT had been used as a pseudo rainy day fund. Prohibiting the trust from being used that way in the future would increase transparency around the true state of city reserves. On consensus forecasting, the staff report raises the possibility of replacing OMB's near total control of the revenue estimate as the budget is being adopted with a consensus revenue estimating process involving the mayor, the council, and perhaps other parties. Many states use some form of a consensus process, although the details vary widely. There is some evidence that credit raters look favorably on states with such a process, although depending on how the rules are set, the process can lengthen the time needed to complete the revenue estimate. New York State's version involves representatives of the governor, the legislative leaders, and the state controller. If no consensus is reached, the state controller's estimates are used. Having a fallback if no consensus is reached is critical to the success of this process anywhere it's being used. The staff report suggests May 1st as the target completion date if the city were to implement consensus forecasting. A later date would be preferable if the forecasts are to take into account the typical the critical April personal income tax collections and the early May property tax assessment roll. That information is, in most years, is critical to setting the revenue estimate for the upcoming year. I would also note that while the mayor currently controls the revenue forecast for all sources other than the property tax, the council does have the control of the property tax rate, but has not used it since the 1990s. Certainly politically difficult, but adjusting the rate to fund priorities of the council is an option that's currently available. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And so Francisco, already city council has got enough power that you have to help ensure better revenue, better expense estimates. They can do that by withholding budget marks. Why that is not being utilized or used that often as we expect it to be?
I'm sorry, that was for me. Can you repeat the question? I didn't.
No, do you think that city council already got enough power through budget marks to estimate better the revenue and the expenditure? So why don't we see more of this?
The revenue estimate is the responsibility as of the current city charter of the mayor. There was a and as George correctly stated, the city council can't change the the rate for property tax in order to balance the budget. There was a change in the 2019 charter commission that required a process for changing the revenue estimate from the mayor, communicated from the mayor to the council after the executive budget is presented. So I think that there is in general, there is a little bit of an asymmetry regarding both the revenue forecast and the expense forecast. As I mentioned, it's difficult to envision a situation where, at least for me, it's difficult to envision a situation where the accuracy of one is taken into account, without regards to the other. Unfortunately, we are in a position where expenses are greatly understated, and therefore revenues have to be understated by the revenue forecast, so that as the year goes on and costs are actually realized, and we know that they're going to be realized because nobody thinks that the City FAPS program is going to drop its cost year over year between 25 and 26 by 1.2 billion, right? Because there's a drop in cost while the program is increasing at 4% every month. So because that is not reasonable, then I think that there's an extra bias for the mayor to keep the tax revenue forecast as cautious as possible, so that there are extra resources to pay for things that we already know we're going to need to pay for. So I don't know that it's revenues and expenses are things that the council and the mayor have to agree upon, but requiring consensus on revenues without asking for for accuracy in the expense, it seems that is going to bias towards more spending rather than accurately representing expenditures. That was a little long-winded, but I think it's a fuller representation of my thinking. Henry has a question.
You have a comment?
The only point I would offer is there are examples. If you look at consensus forecasting models in different states, there are a handful, not many, but there are a handful that actually also require consensus assumptions on the growth of major program areas, so that would accomplish some of what that would address some of the concern that if there only has to be consensus on the revenue side, you're going to have a bias towards conservative forecasts, and then in order to have sort of build up dollars available when and if costs grow faster than originally budgeted in the adopted budget.
Sure, I'll just ask, are there any, you've named some things, but are there any particular political considerations, political barriers that routinely sort of undermine or prevent the accurate forecasting, or even any other structural barriers?
I mean, the staff at OMB, their responsibility is to make sure New York City gets through a fiscal year with a balanced budget. And one way of accomplishing that is to, it's not that they're lying, it's just the institutional bias towards a more conservative assumption about revenues. And other players in the process, the council in some areas, have a priority that's somewhat different, and that's an example of where sort of where you sit politically affects, and the responsibilities you have in that role affect, the decisions you're going to make when you're doing a revenue forecast and expense. I think some of the political, the idea of going to the U of A's and generally shrinking them so that these particularly broad ones that cover, you've got a significant chunk of the police department is in one pair of U of A's, has their budget in one pair of U of A's. Which undermines or it has a constraint on how much the city council can do there, because the mayor can move up to 5% of the contents of the U of A, and if you've got a big broad U of A, 5% can be a pretty big amount of dollars. Moving to smaller ones would, I think, increase the council's. It would at least give the council another opportunity as a place where it could, withhold approval on a modification, or it just increases their leverage in the negotiation.
Thank you.
So we have a question for co-chair Henry Garrido. You have questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just ask the question, and that's for the two of you. I have two questions. The first question had to do with what role do you think the independent budget office could play in revenue consensus, right? Whereas as it applies to the mayors having total authority for the revenue. One. And the second, I couldn't quite understand your testimony regarding the retiree healthcare reserve not being part of the reserves. It was created on the legislation under Mayor Bloomberg at that time, and Christine Quinn was the speaker, to deal with some of the costs associated with what is now embedded on the administrative code of the city of New York that says that the city shall pay up to the HIP HMO rate, which is a mandate that the city has under the administrative code. And I couldn't quite comprehend, you said that it should not be and not to be used as a reserve. So could you maybe clarify that second point for me? And the first point is for the both of you. Thank you.
I want to have George answer the IBO one first.
On your first question, I mean, what I was saying is that now that we have a true rainy day fund, and we don't have to have this pseudo rainy day fund that the retiree benefits trust provided, we should, maybe it doesn't need to be in the charter, but somewhere I think it would be worth, either statutorily or in the charter, saying that this is not a fiscal reserve. The fiscal reserve will be the rainy day fund going forward. I think that's going to it may not really, at the end of the day, it may not matter which account those dollars are in, but I think it really would add to the transparency about what's the state of the city's reserves.
Yeah, but isn't it the case that the difference is that the retiree reserve fund, as created by legislation, specific in its nature and its both the utilization can only be within a framework, whereas the rainy day fund could be used for anything.
Yes, but
right?
it's been used up until the rainy day fund became available. It was at times being used. The city would, the city makes a payment annually into it, but if as long as the money in the trust is sufficient to meet the current year obligations to retirees, that there has to be enough money in the trust for that. But if the trust has accumulated more than that much money, the city can take that. And it had been doing that in the past. It doesn't leave at the end of the day, the trust is not, the status of the trust does not change, but the money some of the money was used as a, by letting the spending go on that's required in the year, but not putting in new dollars because there's sufficient money in the trust without those new dollars. The city was saving money that year. And I think that's what, often leads to a lot of confusion about how the reserves are and what condition they're in. So I don't know, does that clarify what a?
Yeah, I think what you are suggesting seems to be a complete and utter violation of the law, in the sense that the bill was created. Well, look, we can debate it, but I'm familiar with this bill because I was part of the original inception in terms of what you can and cannot do for it. But it says specifically that it could be used for retirees. If it's being used for something other than that, I get your point about not having to put money into it.
That's the only point I'm making.
Right. But you're not suggesting that the money that's there is being used for other sources other than the retiree healthcare reserve. Are you?
That the city was able to save money in years where it was facing a revenue shortfall.
I see. Okay.
Not making the payment because there was already sufficient funds.
I see.
In the trust fund.
Right.
For that year. And
but just to be clear, not suggesting this is like Social Security scheme that the federal government at times dip into and use it for something else.
I'm suggesting that it be, the way it was used was legal. No one said it was illegal.
Do you mind if I just try clarifying a little bit? Because I actually think what Francesco and Mr. Sweeting are saying is actually the opposite of a scheme. Basically, in the past, there has not been a clear distinction between the idea of a rainy day fund and an idea of the retirement fund. And what they're suggesting is that actually the charter should specify that those two things are separate and that the retiree fund can only be used for its intended purpose, because now we have a rainy day fund that can be used for general purpose. So it's actually, this would be to the benefit of the retirees, because we would be clearly stating the division between those two funds and their two express purposes.
Thank you.
Did I get that right, Francesco?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that clarify things, Henry?
Indeed. Much
Okay,
better. Thank you.
Great.
Any other comments from the commissioners online? So if not, Francisco, let me ask you a question about rainy day deposits. Citizens Budget Commission calls for 3% revenue growth threshold for triggering mandatory deposits. So can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, as a general matter, we think that having a formula well, let me put it this way. It's very difficult to legislate a formula or all of the details of the deposits and the withdrawals. What if you get it wrong, and so on and so forth. So the first thing that I think it's important is to understand is that the city charter, we are suggesting that the city charter mandates the adoption of a policy. The policy has got to be public. It can be evaluated. It can be changed. We can see whether the city adheres to the policy or not. And, and people can make their own conclusions, whether they are, the New Yorkers or the buyers of our bonds or the rating agencies and so on and so forth. So that we are not too prescriptive. We all know that there are cases in which, you have a recession and you want to use those funds to pay temporarily for a shortfall that then, and then you're going to build them again. And there are cases in which there are emergencies, and we've been through many, right? 9/11 and COVID and so on and so forth. So, it's important not to be too prescriptive and too rigid in the framework. And nobody has, reasonable people can have reasonable disagreements about which one is the best formula. I cannot speak about the CBCs.
My question is, this mandatory, we did not unintentionally cause service reductions because we have to mandatorily put money in the rainy fund? Because this kind of goes back to my days as a in the business school, right? After a surgeon, I went to business school. I was told in a capitalist economy, you don't really park your money. You take your money and you invest it and create economic development and growth, and you make more money. Use money to make more money. But here we have a kind of philosophy where we just park the money, hoping that we'll use it for some other thing. Will it not kind of, I don't know, to me, it looks like not a good business principle. Would you run that if you're running a big Fortune 500 company, that you take the money and then park it
I
somewhere?
think I
Half a
think lots
percent.
of companies. I think lots of companies have to have reserves, and I think it's a form of insurance that will benefit New Yorkers because balanced budget are pro-cyclical. It means that you need to cut when things are bad and people need the service the most.
Much of reserve you need.
As a business school alum, I think you should also remember that the recessions actually happen. And what are we going to do then? I mean, we're shrinking. So how are we going to pay for the services? You need to cut spending, right? Or you need to find new revenue sources. I think, having reserves like many companies do and many governments do is going to help alleviate the strictures of budgeting during a recession. It's not wasted money, I don't think.
George, I just want to ask a little bit of minimum budget. The IBO suggested minimum budgets,
I'm sorry.
which is like the charter is a minimum of 10% of the appropriation of the OMB, right? And in your experience as IBO's minimum budget model worked in practice.
Yes, I think it worked quite well. In the very early days of IBO, then Mayor Giuliani was not happy to see IBO established, and he blocked it, lost several court cases, and then after the IBO was brought online and began to operate, there actually were 2 years in a row where the executive budget submitted a zero for IBO, even though the language of the charter said 10%. That we overcame that with mostly political pressure, and then since then there's never been an issue about paying the 10%. IBO, I think, somehow, for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, has avoided some of the problems that other independent agencies seem to have in terms of being able to get their employees through the hiring process. For whatever reason, IBO never had to deal with that. We got a lump sum, and we could spend that. We didn't have to report back to OMB. So I think that's a combination of the particularly strong language in the charter, the history of the court cases, and probably a fair amount of just good luck. I don't quite know, but we, as I said, once we got past the Giuliani years, we largely avoided those problems.
I see a hand. One of the commissioners want to ask a question. Anybody on the online?
Hi, I did. Can you give a little clarity? This question came up before around the budgeting and the UVA. If you had to recommend, what is the unit size that you think is more appropriate, rather than these huge chunks of a whole department?
I guess I would avoid thinking about it as a precise amount. I mean, the purpose of what the charter currently calls for is that a U of A should represent either the OTPS or the PS parts of the budget of an agency's budget for a particular program. And that program could be quite large. So I'm not sure dollars are the right the size of the U of A is probably less important than working to get all of the as much of the costs that go into providing a program or a service or an activity, identifying those and bringing those into one U of A, but have each U of A segregated into by the particular program or agent or function you're funding.
Any other questions? Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We really appreciate you being here and sharing insight with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Panel number 2 will be Charlotte Mangian on Zoom, and then Richard Lee is also on Zoom. So we start with Charlotte.
Great, thank you all. I hope you can hear me. Good evening, honorable members of Speaker Adams' 2025 Charter Revision Commission. My name is Charlotte Hamamjian, and I serve as the Deputy Controller for Contracts and Procurement in the Office of the New York City Controller, Brad Lander. In addition to my capacity as Deputy Controller, I also serve as one of the Controller's 2 appointees to the Procurement Policy Board. Prior to my current role as Deputy Controller and for the entirety of my professional career, I have served in procurement and budget leadership roles in multiple city agencies such as the New York City Economic Development Corporation, the Parks Department, the Department of Design and Construction, and the Department of Education. It is my privilege to offer testimony tonight on municipal procurement, a topic that has and continues to be my professional passion. Last month, our office shared with the Commission our recommendations, which align with those of the Commission's goals of improving city government and include specific focus on recommendations that promote public integrity and improvements to our procurement systems. I want to thank Commission members for discussing these recommendations with our office in advance of today's hearing, and tonight I will be speaking about some of these recommendations as well as the thoughtful ones made by the Commission in its preliminary report. I will also be submitting written testimony tomorrow. Contracting is a critical process through which city government meets its goals and provides services to New Yorkers. A lack of focus and commitment from Mayor Adams' administration to reform city procurement processes has exacerbated both the registration and payment delays that create worsening challenges for the city's many honest contracting partners and the risks of corruption, fraud, and abuse by dishonest ones. In both cases, the failure to reform procurement is eroding public trust in New York City government. As our office most recently discussed in 2 reports, late registration and payment of contracts is a long-standing flaw within the city's financial management practices. Over 3/4 of the city's contracts with nonprofit organizations are registered late with an average retroactivity rate of 8 months. As a result, nonprofit providers, MWBEs, and other vendors struggle with cash flow and face severe financial difficulties. In February 2022, our office, together with Mayor Adams, released an action memo, A Better Contract for New York, a joint task force to get nonprofits paid on time. The first recommendation in the memo was to establish timeframes for each stage of the contracting process in order to hold the city and vendors accountable for the timely registration of contracts and ensure that the city can pay its vendors on time. Currently, there are no mandated timeframes that govern the city's procurement process outside of the 30-day review period for our office that is mandated by the city charter. Over 2 years later, the city has yet to implement this recommendation. As the Commission notes in its preliminary report, Local Law 169 of 2023 set a mandated directive that the mayor's administration undertake a comprehensive analysis to inform meaningful timeframes for each step of the contracting process. In my capacity as a PBB member, I sent a letter to the former director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services that outlined the ways that the study and its recommendations fall far short of the mandate. Council members acknowledged and agreed with this assessment at a recent council hearing. Despite this, there has been no formal response or refined recommendations from MOX. Since taking office in 2022, Controller Lander has strengthened the office's role in reviewing and approving city contracts, identifying systemic challenges, and proposing common sense reforms to protest public integrity, while balancing the need for efficiency and flexibility. Following the issuance of a November 2021 report from the Department of Investigation, we sent a letter to the mayor urging that the PBB convene and implement DOI's recommendations to address corruption vulnerabilities. We also issued 2 reports with detailed recommendations to strengthen oversight and accountability and prevent corruption in procurement. Unfortunately, the PBB, under the leadership and management of Mox, has not acted in response. In theory, the PBB already has the power and authority to enact most, if not all, of these necessary reforms. However, in reality, the PBB cannot do so without buy-in from the mayoral administration. As currently structured, the PBB is effectively accountable to just the mayor. Our office supports a charter amendment that would ensure that the mission of the PBB does not waver and that the board, irrespective of its appointing administration, is fully empowered to serve the true purpose for which it was created, namely to ensure that the city's procurement process uphold the tenets of integrity and transparency while balancing the flexibility that's necessary to cultivating innovation and competition. Once again, thank you for your time and attention to these recommendations. And again, I will be submitting written testimony tomorrow.
Thank you. Mr. Lee?
Yes, thank you. My name is Richard Lee. I am the Finance Director for the City Council. At the last commission, thank you to all the commissioners here today. At the last commission hearing, I spoke in length a little bit about the budget transparency, a lot of items that Francesco and George spoke about today. So I'm happy to answer or extrapolate any other questions related to those items today. Charlotte actually hit most of the points that I was going to bring up on the procurement side. So I'm just going to re-up what she is essentially saying, in that a lot of the policies that we've been facing have been challenging. The nonprofit organizations in particular have been having many challenges related to registration of their contracts for services that they are being contracted out for, as well as payments. We have payments that haven't been made for more than 2 years in a lot of these instances. Now, the City Council legislatively are trying to address some of these items. We have Intro 1247, which would mandate 80% of contract funding to be paid at the time of registration. We have Intro 1249, which would mandate a corrective action plan for agencies who do not, who are unable to execute contracts within 90 days. And we have Intro 1248, which would formally turn the Mayor's Office of Contracts into the Department of Contracts, which would elevate it into a department level, hopefully standardizing contracting processes across the board. But I think a lot of the issues that we are facing today can be addressed with the PBB board, especially with the laws and the rules behind what is being put out and the enforcement as such. I think one way we do have, one way the Charter Commission can actually help with this is by expanding the board members. Right now, we have 3 mayoral members and 2 controller members. I think if we're able to expand it to 7, perhaps 1 appointee from the City Council, or maybe 1 from like the borough president or the controller, whoever it might be. I think another member would help diversify that, as well as, put in any additional changes that the communities have been coming to a lot of our offices for. So I'll just simply end it at that, because Charlotte hit almost all of the points that we were going to bring up, and we are in agreement. And I'll yield my time back.
Thank you. And I just have one question. Since the mayor runs most of the agencies in the city, is it not fair to have the mayor have the majority members in the board?
I'm happy to jump in here, Richard, and then feel free to jump in as well. I think, Commissioner, it is not just the composition of the board in terms of there being 3 mayoral appointees and 2 controller appointees. It is that currently, as written, the mayor is also the elected official who chooses the chair. And then under an executive order, it's Executive Order 121 from 2008, the responsibility to administer the PPB lies with the Mayor's Office of Contract Services. As a result of that, any instance where, and I alluded to a few examples where our office has proposed agenda items to be brought to the PBB, not to mention the fact that many of the recent actions that the PBB has voted on or that the council has proposed in support of its advocates really didn't need to materialize as a result of a local law. The charter already establishes that the role of the PBB is to promulgate rules that address things like who can submit a vendor protest, contracting timelines, and such. And so, from my experience as a PBB member, the greater frustration is that the non-mayoral appointees to the PBB have really had no say in being able to even bring items to the agenda. And when we have, as is evidenced by anybody who wants to look at any of the recordings from PBB meetings, which are available on Mox's website, when we have raised constructive feedback, meaningful feedback to even proposed rules, our recommendations, our feedback have gone unrecognized, inadequately addressed. And so from my experience as a PBB member, it's not just the composition of the board, but it is the control of the agenda and the administration of the board.
And I think Charlotte hit it perfectly. And the mayoral agencies aren't the only entities that are, that have to contract out, right? The city council discretionary contracts follow within the same promulgation, as well as the borough presidents who also fall in the same promulgation. And so we are also entities that do issue contracts discretionarily or not. With what Charlie said was exactly that, in that rules that need to be amended for the better, it's very challenging to do so. And a lot of times we are having to forcefully do them legislatively when it doesn't always have to be that case.
Yeah, just a quick question. Just trying to sort of follow the bouncing ball here, and I think I've got it, but in terms of establishing these time frames, you were talking about when you were giving specific sort of charter recommendations. I want to just follow up on that, and if you can just be a little bit more specific. That is, I heard talk about legislation that tried to address some issues. There was the recommendation on expanding PBB board members. What else specifically would you recommend that goes towards changing control and mission of the PPB that would address your concerns?
Thank you for that question. So I think, what Richard and I are both in agreement on is that the recommendations tied to contracting timeframes, so deadlines that entities beyond just our office are mandated to comply with, the intent of which would be to ensure timely registration, and then ultimately after the registration of contracts, timely payment, are all accomplished and able to be accomplished outside of changes to the charter. The charter section regarding the PPB, again, already gives the PPB the authority to set these timeframes. Unfortunately, because the administration of the agenda of the PPB has lied with the mayor, and as a result, we have been unable to, outside of legislation that was introduced by the council, force the introduction of those timeframes. So as it relates to timeframes, thanks to the legislation that the council put forth, there should be amendments coming forth to the PPB. We hope to see something more robust than their study that was produced as a result of Local Law 169, but those likely can already be completed by the PPB outside of charter reform. I think what Richard and I are speaking to are the limitations in the management and structure of the PBB, which is where the proposed charter revisions and amendments would come.
Yep.
Sure. Charlotte, I'll ask this. Richard gave, I think, a suggestion for how he would recomposition it, which would be the addition of 2 additional members. What would be your suggestion? Would you keep it at 5 but spread out the appointment power? Or would you add extra members? How would you achieve that balance ideally?
Sorry there, I was having trouble unmuting myself. I know that there have been some discussions, for example, using the composition of a similar board, which is also actually managed by MOX, which is the Franchise Concession Review Committee. The FCRC is the body that is responsible for not just promulgating rules by which agencies enter into franchises and concessions, but in some instances, based on those rules, also actually approves the proposed franchises and concessions. And in that instance, in addition to mayoral appointees and the controller appointee, there are also borough president appointees. Someone would probably have to look into the history of the composition of that board. That is likely the case because with franchise and concessions, what is being granted to a private entity is the use of public space or public property for a revenue generating function. And likely in those instances, the input of course, the borough presidents for each of the boroughs or citywide that are being impacted required to be solicited. To Richard's point, I'll also just say, as it relates to procurement, oversight anyway, the two main entities are MOX, which administers oversight on behalf of mayoral agencies, and then our office, which is responsible for ensuring not just that mayoral agencies, but any agency that is subject to the PPB, which as Richard indicated, is not just mayoral agencies. Our office is required to comply with the city's procurement rules. The city council is, as well as district attorney's office, borough president offices. And so I think that there is, I think to have representatives from both the mayor's administration and the controller's administration makes sense. I think the compromise could either be by adding additional controller representatives, perhaps a representative from the council, given how involved the council is in certain types of procurements, could also work. But I also think that rethinking the appointment of the chair as well as the administration of the PBB, which is where pulling together the agenda and ensuring that recommendations and feedback from all PBB members, irrespective of who appointed them, are taken into consideration is another avenue to address the issue.
Yeah, Co-Chair Henry Garrido.
Yeah, I think to Richard's point and Charlotte's point, one of the concerns we have is we want to make sure that the issues that can be addressed by local law are not put in front of the voters, right? And you, Richard, you named a number of bills that are already addressing some of the concerns you have. And this is what I would like clarity between the two of you, because I thought I had it and then I got lost. That if the idea is that we can increase the number of members in the PPB to increase and include other agencies, right, and give them more power, that's one thing. If the idea then is that, well, there are all these things that are going to be increased in terms of power, particularly all the testimony we heard about emergency contract, then I think that's a whole different thing. So what I would like clarity between the two of you is, if you can separate the pieces that are being addressed to local law, or could be addressed local law, and the things that you think legitimately belong in a charter amendment question, then I think that would be very helpful to me.
No, I think I could answer partially, because specifically what I mentioned is, we have these pieces of legislation because PPB isn't addressing them currently. And to Charlotte's point, it isn't addressing them because of the way it's structured. If PPB was more flexible and was more willing to adopt policies that better reflect the needs of a lot of our vendors and nonprofits, we wouldn't need to go through this process of doing things legislatively. PPB, by its nature, will be able to adopt a lot of these changes to make it easier for nonprofits to get paid on time, or come up with a better schedule, or come up with better deadlines for when approvals need to happen on the contracting side. The PPB the board can do that itself. It's just that the inaction is what's forcing the legislative body to sort of take action now, right? We shouldn't have to do this if the PPB is able to adopt a lot of these changes naturally, is I think what my point was.
So are you suggesting a charter amendment?
So
to
the
the
charter amendment that we are suggesting is in order to make it easier for a lot of these changes to go through, to make it less mayoral heavy, who already oversees the mayor's office of contracts, but bring in additional bodies plus the appointment of the director of PBB by bringing other parties who are also part of the procurement process. The city council, as an example, is part of the process because we are intimately involved with the budget plus our discretionary fund. The board presidents are also intimately involved in this. So that could be like two examples of additions to members who will help balance this board and make changes so that the legislative body doesn't have to do this in this way.
All right, thank you both.
Thank you.
Another question for the commissioner, sir, and online.
I did have a question about whether you were pointing to the actual what may be the contradiction, or at least a problem or conflict between the supervision of the mayor over the PBB, period, right? Is that part of the thought around the amendment, is that the actual oversight should be outside of the mayor's office of contracts?
Yes, in a way. The mayor's office of contracts already is tasked with execution, right, of a lot of these contract approvals, right? The board itself sets rules for all agencies, mayoral and non-mayoral, and it having a more broader composition and having a with more parties involved to be able to make changes and make it more flexible for the responsibilities of MOCs could help with a lot of the issues that we're having right now. We have issues with contracts just not getting registered for 9, 10, 11 months, right? And so if we were able to put in rules in place, then we might be able to address this through the board rules. But right now it's very difficult to put forth any changes. We're not on the PBB rules, Charlotte is, and she kind of explained how difficult already it is to promulgate some of these rule changes, right? And so by having more parties involved who also see different parts of the procurement process would help make the changes to this to the rules a lot easier, in my opinion. Or it'll make it not easier, but it'll allow for broader perspectives to be brought in for the rulemaking parties.
Yeah, and Richard, I would just agree with all of that and just tack on that it would also actually allow for the PPB to execute what it is mandated to execute under the charter, which is to review the procurement rules and to make revisions and recommendations to changes or to add new rules as it deems necessary. And so if not all members of the PPB are being afforded the ability to do that, then as a whole, the PPB is not able to exercise the important mandate that it is given under the charter.
Okay, thank you both of you for your time and insight. The commission really appreciates it. So now we go to the panel number 3. Professor William Hoagland will be on Zoom, and then we have Zaira Nazir, who's in person. Professor Hoagland, would you like to start?
Sure. Can you hear me okay? Start my video. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. I'm Bill Hoagland, Senior Vice President here with the Bipartisan Policy Center located in Washington, D.C. Thank you for allowing me to testify virtually. The Bipartisan Policy Center is a 501c3 organization created 17 years ago by 4 former U.S. Senate Majority Leaders, two on the Republican side, Senator Bob Dole and Howard Baker, and 2 on the Democratic side, Senator George Mitchell and Tom Daschle. At the outset, I want to make clear that I am not a lawyer, specifically not a constitutional lawyer. I have, however, spent my career over 33 years on Capitol Hill, beginning with the Congressional Budget Office, which was established in 1976, and later with the U.S. Senate Committee on the Budget. Having had the front row seat to the federal budget, I've seen up close the Congressional Budget Impoundment Control Act of 1974, its evolution and operations. The commission staff asked that I discuss guardrails on impoundment proceedings at the federal level versus local level. First, the Federal Impoundment Control Act, you should know, grew out of actions of President Richard Nixon to impound monies that Congress had authorized and appropriated, and the president had actually signed into the law before he closed not to spend it. The president saw this as his ability to control a Congress that he argued had mismanaged fiscal policy. The act was one of the last pieces of legislation signed by President Nixon before he resigned his office over Watergate. Second, I understand the commission is looking to understand how to strike a balance between permitting mayoral impoundment in times of needed fiscal necessity while reducing the ability to conduct policy-based political impoundments. As I understand your current process, as outlined in the preliminary staff report, there are no guidelines that define the boundary between the mayor's impoundment proceedings, demanding fiscal prudence and discretionary rationale that can therefore subvert the adoption of the budget of the council. The Federal Impoundment Control Act allows the president to propose rescinding budget authority by notifying Congress in a special message that requires, among other things, a clear statement of, and I quote, the reasons for the impoundment, the estimated fiscal, economic, and all the facts and circumstances and considerations related to or bearing upon the proposed rescission. It would seem to me at a minimum the guardrail language at the local level, similar to those, should be required. And that no action by the mayor can proceed for the specified period of time in the case of the federal government's 45 days. But if no action is taken to disapprove with a simple majority the federal law, the funds impounded can continue to be impounded. The Federal Government Accounting Office, an independent nonpartisan agency, is the legislative branch that oversees the impoundment control and has the authority to sue the executive branch if funds are improperly withheld. I do not know if your Department of Investigation or the city's independent budget office could play a similar enforcement role since it is an agency within the executive branch, not your legislative branch. I want to emphasize here a point that the federal special rescission message addresses policy-based political impoundments. There is a second part of the Impoundment Control Act, the federal law, that may be relevant in your deliberations. This other provision in the law allows the president to defer budget authority. The deferral does not cancel the budget authority as a rescission message would, but rather allows the president to withhold spending to provide for, number one, contingencies, two, greater efficiency or operations, or number three, what might be specifically provided by law. He can do that. The President's Office of Management and Budget oversees deferrals through the apportionment process, and although they can take effect without congressional approval, they can be overturned by Congress. Deferrals are administrative procedures designed to have no specific policy implication. Federal deferrals are referred to as programmatic deferrals, which are characterized as routine, trivial matters relating to the normal and orderly operation of the government. The concern raised in the preliminary staff report that the mayor's office can set and modify spending allotments quarterly without council approval is an enigma to me. The Federal Anti-Deficiency Act requires quarterly apportionments of federal spending, full transparency of those apportionments, and notification to Congress when changes are made via either impoundment or deferral. It would seem strengthening this procedure of the apportionment and quarterly reporting to the council of any changes either through deferrals or impoundments should be considered in your deliberations. Finally, let me conclude by highlighting that the presidents, beginning particularly with the Clinton administration, have not routinely relied on the Impoundment Control Act rescission authority. President George W. Bush, President Obama, and the Biden administration did not submit any rescissions during their entire time in office. In the first Trump administration, he did submit one proposal to rescind $15 billion that Congress disapproved. And that might explain why, despite all the attention given to federal funding reductions here early in this second term of President Trump, he has not submitted any rescissions, but is now arguing that the entire law is unconstitutional and he can impound funds without control. Which lets me finish by simply saying my experience here has been over nearly 50 years working in these vineyards, that no procedure, however carefully crafted, can be successful without the political will of all parties, executive and legislative, to work together for the common good of those they represent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hey, good evening, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. I have a longer written testimony, which if you'd like, I can share with you after. My name is Zara Nasser. I'm the director of the People's Plan NYC, a coalition of grassroots organizations and unions fighting for a city that provides dignity and care and justice for all New Yorkers. We are best known for our People's Budget campaign. For the last few years, instead of fighting for deeper investments, we've had to fight just to stop the cuts made under this administration to libraries, to parks, CUNY, 3K, and education. While we've helped win back some funding, the real issue that we've seen is structural. The city's budget process is opaque, undemocratic, and far too vulnerable to mayoral overreach. So therefore, we are urging the commission to adopt these four key reforms. So first, we also support restricting the mayor's impoundment power. Right now, the mayor can unilaterally withhold or delay funds, even after the city council has approved the budget, undermining council authority and community priorities. Impoundment should only be allowed during declared financial emergencies with sign-off from the council, comptroller, and/or IBO. Second, we are recommending that the Charter Revision Commission explore expanding the council's power over budget modifications. So mid-year budget changes currently can happen without a required council vote, leaving the door open for unilateral adjustments by the mayor. The council should be required to vote on all modifications with the power to line item veto any transfers or changes, to ensure that changes are negotiated and not unilaterally determined by the mayor. Third, we are recommending an expansion of budget transparency through the units of appropriation and budget function analysis. Right now, many agencies use broad or vague budget lines that make oversight nearly impossible. The charter should require detailed breakdowns of agency spending through units of appropriation and budget function analysis to more agencies. And we are also recommending quarterly reporting on staffing as well to see whether or not staffing is being delayed in particular agencies. Finally, revenue. We want to reform revenue forecasting. So the mayor has too much control over determining how much money the city has to spend. We support a consensus forecasting model that incorporates experts from OMB, the council, IBO, and comptroller. We're not calling for what the staff and the commission has recommended, the consensus revenue estimate. We're being slightly more risk adverse and conservative just because of concerns around unintended consequences that might lead to mid-year pegs or a less functional system. So we'll be submitting written testimony that explains these proposals in more detail. We're heartened that 3 out of the 4 topics in our proposals are already being considered by the commission, and we hope that the commission will consider the budget modification powers as well as the difference in our revenue estimate versus forecasting proposals. We urge the commission to consider our proposals with our input and adopt reforms that empower the public and protect public services.
Thank you. Any questions? Any questions from the commissioners online? Okay. Thank you very much.
I actually do have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just want to invite you to elaborate on something. That is, sometimes it gets hard to extract and separate the issues that people have with this mayor from the issues that people have with the structures themselves. And so if you could just, thinking of that theme, could you just further sort of break down how this is aimed to be a structural fix that can transcend whatever the politics of the council or mayor are?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So I guess, sometimes when there are particular administrations, you just kind of learn more about what is possible through the mayoral administration. Maybe we're learning that in the federal level as well. But I think, there are, in general, I think like the city council is supposed to be a check and balance, especially budgetarily, with the administration, with the mayor. And I think in many ways, like the legislative system is much better set up for that check and balance. They can pass bills with a supermajority, and even if the mayor vetoes the bills, if it's a supermajority, it goes back to the council. They can pass it anyway. With the budget, especially, we're a grassroots coalition. We've been working with a lot of other organizations and council members. It is we've learned a lot in the last 3 years just about, I guess, like, and the previous speaker kind of alluded to this. It seems kind of, excuse my lay language, it seems wild that like one person was like, I am gonna do, this kind of budgetary program, which was like across the board pegs and whatever else. And it seemed like most of the public and most of the city council was not supportive of that program. And yet there was like, and this happened for 3 years. We've been seeing this happen for 3 years. And there was like absolutely no way to stop it from happening, basically. It feels like, at least from the people who work on democracy and
Didn't feel particularly democratic.
It didn't feel democratic, and it felt like, there's one person and we applied a ton of pressure on him and tried to get him to change course, but and even with the council. And I think the council would often, say to us, like, we are with you, we agree. And also, like, if we, the council has the ability to pass their own budget, for example. And, we felt like that should be considered, not that they should necessarily do it, but that they should consider it. But the answer that was given back to us was, well, the mayor can just do what they want anyway, right? And they can withhold funds, they can punish the council for amending the budget, for passing their own budget. And so it felt like, okay, well, that's not really a check and balance. That's not really a true relationship in which the council has leverage over the mayor. I think the more that grassroots groups got involved, it felt like, and I put a lot of weight in what the council has been able to do over the last 3 years with with the limitations that are currently, charter orchestrated around what the mayor is able to do versus what the council is able to do. But it does feel like ultimately, up to a certain level, even if they were able to negotiate the amount of money, that in relationship to the amount of money that is in the city budget and what we were able to win versus what was passed in the final budget, always kind of felt like, are we, is the council like a rubber stamp at the end of the day? And I think I used to work in the council and now I'm on the advocacy side. I feel very strongly that, there's a council member office in every neighborhood. We have much more access. You can go to your council member's office and advocate to them directly. That's much harder with the mayor. And so I think in some ways, if we are interested in democratizing the budget, anybody who's interested in democratizing the budget should advocate for the council to have more power, because they are a direct line to the community. And I think it's not to say that the mayor's side should be a complete balance, because I think we also are like not supportive of that. But I think there needs to be more checks and balances so that if there's widespread disagreement around what the mayor or the administration's agenda is, there should be a true negotiating relationship in which there's leverage from the legislative branch, the council, in order to actually have like that kind of relationship where the budget is actually a negotiated document at the end of the day. And I think our other proposal around the budget modifications is that should be happening year round. Right now, the council is not required to vote on budget modifications, and sometimes it hasn't been that political, so it's fine, whatever. But we are in a a time where like it has been, there's been differences between the mayor and the council, and we're headed into probably more of a period of time where that's going to be the case. And there needs to be, again, not a complete overhaul, not a complete rebalance, but any changes that are made from adopted should also be something that's going to the council, that's being negotiated or approved. And if everybody's great with it, no problem, it goes through. But if there's contention, there needs to at least be, some public discourse and like a tussle around like what should happen.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you, for your time and your insight. We go to the panel number 4, Emily Jimenez and Richard Kramer. Oh, yeah, Richard and Kramer input, both of them input.
Hello all. My name is Emily Jimenez, and I work for United Activities Unlimited in the Workforce Development Division. My organization is a partner of the Civic Engagement Commission in implementing the People's Money program. Our project focuses on building success for high school students through workshops, mentorship, career counseling, and academic support services. I am here testifying on behalf of my organization and its constituents. We at United Activities Unlimited have directly seen the impact that the People's Money program has had in our community. Through workshops and individualized support, our project has helped our participants feel more prepared for college as well as their future careers. We have also seen how the projects implemented by other organizations have created change throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. The funding currently allocated is insufficient to run a true citywide participatory budgeting process, and the decision for what to invest in a charter mandate voted on by 1 million New Yorkers is dependent on each administration that sits in City Hall. This creates a high degree of instability for the process. The process allows individuals from the local community to have a voice and see the ways in which local government can support them, and so proper funding for this process is crucial. Instability is unacceptable for a process that has proven success in both the City Council and schools, as a part of the MAP program, and of course citywide as People's Money. We ask that the Commission consider a minimum allocation of 0.1% of the city budget to be reviewed every 3 years, along with appropriate staffing increases for the Civic Engagement Commission. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, please.
Sorry.
I didn't know if I was going.
Yeah. Controller Lander was part of the team of council members that started participatory budgeting 8 or 9 years ago, more than that, probably 10 years ago now. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And we were excited when the Civic Engagement Commission was founded and participatory budgeting citywide was launched. And probably because of the timing and the proximity to COVID, I just feel like it has not gotten off the ground the way the council specific programs did. So I know you're not staff on the commission, but like I would be in favor of a higher allocation, but it just feels to me like it's not a thing that has really captured public interest the way maybe we had hoped it would back in 2019. So do you have a read on why that is, and like if the money were actually allocated, if it could be used to better engage people on it?
I think from my perspective, the process seems to be still growing. I know on Staten Island, there is only one project for the People's Money. That being said, that project specifically, we are budgeted for 40 participants, and we had over 100 participants interested in the program. That being said, I feel like it depends on the knowledge of the process. And I think there definitely could be more done to market that process. And I think the staffing increases will also help with that. Having people know about the process and understand what it is will maybe generate a little bit more excitement around it. I know that the people that are currently involved are very excited about it, but I personally, I didn't hear about it until I was a part of it. So I think definitely getting the word out is really important. And I think that the funding increase as well as the staffing increases can help do that.
Any questions from the commissioners online? Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Rishenda Kramer, is she around? Please.
Good evening. My name's Richenda Kramer, and I'm a Staten Island resident. For 10 years, I was a volunteer active in prison issues through AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, and now, the last 10 years through the last campaign against isolated confinement. For the past 2 years, I've been attending the Board of Corrections meetings, which are lengthy and dispiriting. It was 4.5 hours yesterday. The BOC needs more independence, more power, and a bigger budget. It's largely under the control of the mayor, who can appoint or has approval power over most of the members. The Board of Corrections does not have sufficient power. It cannot enforce anything over the DOC, and it does not have a large enough budget to examine and contest the statements and assertions of the DOC, the Department of Corrections. Clearly, there are many issues which need to be changed, and the Board of Corrections needs to be both stronger in its oversight, particularly of Rikers, and especially needs to have a decent budget. At present, they have a staff of 32 for the 9 members. If the Board of Corrections had a budget of 1% of the DOC budget, they could have a staff of about 100, which would allow them to fully carry out their mandate to make sure that the DOC is achieving the minimum standard of care set in the DOC Charter, which the DOC is not doing at present, as we know from the newspapers, that the life in Rikers is unimaginable. At yesterday's meeting, the issue of deadlocking was again raised by someone who used to work at Rikers. Deadlocking is a word that DOC uses to describe the use of solitary confinement of a person in incarceration by a SEER, a corrections officer. It's a decision which is enforced immediately, and there's no discussion of it. Solitary confinement like this is illegal under the HALT Act. When the issue was raised 2 months ago, the DOC denied that it existed, but agreed it should be looked into. The BOC has not finished their inquiry of the subject, and this is probably due to the lack of staff. In addition to funds, there needs to be a change in the charter to give more power to the BOC to enforce minimum standards. DOC routinely asks for variances to accept more people for the number of people incarcerated as the number of people incarcerated rises. And many of the buildings at Rikers are already severely overcrowded. Overcrowding leads to greater anger and greater violence. 60% of these people are there because they cannot raise bail and they wait for trial, as did Khalid Browder, who died after 800 days in solitary confinement at the age of 19, because he was charged with stealing his own backpack. The police charged him that the backpack didn't belong to him, and he had 3 years in prison because he just wanted trial. Many of the people who are charged with minor offenses such as this could be freed on their own recognizance. Of the current 530 who are eligible for this, DOC has only examined 7. In addition to severe overcrowding, PICs are not receiving medication and not being taken to medical block. PICs do not have access to necessary phone calls. Visitors are waiting up to 3 hours to visit a loved one, and many of the lawyers and the other people who are going in are also waiting hours for access to the prison. The BOC should have more money, more power, and insist on a change of these inhumane conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
No, I would just say that you should not take the lack of questions as indifference.
No,
This is something that many people have testified about, and your your perspective is well represented. Just want to say
Had a
that.
very spirited set of conversations about this
Yeah,
last week.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Any questions to the commissioners online? Okay, thank you very much for your time. You have a staff member. Thank you. So we go to panel 5, which is Hayden Brockett, Jonathan Goran, and Sarah O'Brien. Please. Introduce yourself and then.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Gorin.
Should I just start?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Jonathan Gorin. I live just across the harbor in downtown Manhattan, and I am a member of the nonprofit group, the New York Clean Air Collective. I came to testify to the Commission today because I have witnessed firsthand how democratizing the enforcement of our environmental and quality of life laws can radically transform New York for the better. This concept of citizen enforcement really works, and it can reinforce the public's confidence in the city's laws. I also have seen how we need more budget transparency when it comes to funding and accounting for the impacts of our environmental laws. Let me tell you a little bit about the Citizens Air Complaint Program. Poor air quality kills 3,000 New Yorkers every year, and it causes special harm to children, pregnant women, and the elderly. For over 50 years, it has been illegal to idle a vehicle's engine for more than 3 minutes in the city. But the law went unenforced by the police department or the Department of Environmental Protection. That changed in 2018 when City Council passed a bill to encourage citizens to report illegal idling by trucks and buses and be compensated with 25% of the fines the city collects. Today, this innovative program is the most successful citizen enforcement initiative in the world. I started participating in the Citizens Air Complaint Program 7 months ago and have already seen the results. There are times where I go up to record a vehicle, and it is not obvious that I'm recording, and the driver shuts off the engine. This is happening throughout the city. People are standing on their block doing nothing, and drivers are still shutting off their engines because they're worried they're going to get a ticket. This program is changing people's behavior. But don't get me wrong, we still have problems with the air quality caused by lack of enforcement. For one thing, the program needs to be more accessible. Currently, DEP does not accept anything other than idling complaints online, and even more importantly, they only accept complaints in English. The later part must change, and citizens must be able to report to the city in the language they feel most comfortable with. The same model of democratic civilian enforcement should be applied to other quality of life problems in our city. I'm sure when you all walk around downtown Manhattan, you see cars parked illegally everywhere. A lot of them also have city permits. Unfortunately, reporting any vehicle to 311 often yields poor results. Most times, if the NYPD responds at all, they'll say that they'll say it's not there anymore. It's too late. There have been instances where I've reported cars with city placards that have obscured license plates or parked dangerously. The NYPD has said that it's gone, and I will go back to where the occurrence was, and it's still there. I will submit another complaint, and they will same thing. They will say it's gone when I know for a fact it's not gone because I can see it with my eyes. A citizen complaint program would solve this issue. If the NYPD does not want to do their jobs, we will, as seen with idling. Additionally, this would curtail, as I talked about earlier, the widespread placard abuse that occurs. Finally, I want to talk about budget transparency. In the case of the Citizens Idling Complaint Program, the complaints are reviewed months after the initial submission date, and the vast majority of summons hearings are held over 400 days after the violation occurred. I don't believe that is fair or fast and speedy trial. There is too much time between when the violation occurs and when the defendant is notified. There is no reason in which a program which makes more than enough to pay for itself should take this long to adjudicate summonses. The revenue must be invested in the program so that the DEP can meet their mandate and review all submissions within 40 days, as required by city law. Using the revenue generated by this program is a no-brainer. It will increase the public's confidence in the city while more effectively curtailing harmful behavior of those who violate the air and noise code. I want to thank the commission for allowing me to testify tonight, and I look forward to the recommendations you make. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address the commission, and thank you for holding this important hearing here on Staten Island. My name is Sarah O'Brien. I live on Staten Island, and I grew up splitting my time between Staten Island and Queens. Today, I want to testify about the importance of empowering ordinary people to change our city for the better. That's really what democracy means, power for the people. As the Commission to Strengthen Local Democracy continues its important work, I ask that you consider the example of the civilian enforcement of our environmental laws through the Citizens Air Complaint Program. This important program improves our city's budget both directly by increasing fine revenues and indirectly by lowering air pollution and the associated health care costs. First, picture this. You work relentlessly for 30 years as a city employee, trying to afford your American dream, a home, and maybe if you're lucky, this home has a porch where you can relax once you finally retire. The only problem is, when you finally get that house, your once dreamt of oasis is transformed into a pollution zone, overtaken by idling vehicles. This was my dad's reality. He retired from the city after 30 years of wanting nothing more than to sit on his front porch in peace. But trucks pulled up day after day here on Staten Island and idled right in front of him, forcing him inside because of the dangerous pollution. So then what? Maybe you call 311 day after day to no avail, and nobody from the city comes out. You keep calling, but you're helpless. You have no power. If only there was a program that allowed citizens to make an impact and stop this pollution. Good news, there is. And that's exactly what my dad did. He started participating in the Citizens Air Complaint Program, which gives ordinary New Yorkers the ability to report idling vehicles. Within a matter of weeks, he saw his landscape transform from literal black clouds to clear skies. Members of the commission, let me tell you, the Citizens Air Program works well. Drivers become more mindful and don't idle. Finally, my dad gets to enjoy his retirement in peace, and I get to stop hearing about it. I had a similar experience. I was a student working as a teacher providing free classes to the Parks Department. At one specific site, the class happened to be at the same time as a commercial garbage pickup. The exhaust and noise was unbearable for the children, many choosing to leave early. And as their teacher, I felt helpless. I would kindly ask the driver to move or turn off his engine, and he would laugh. I had no power. But as soon as I made it clear that I was starting to report his actions, things changed. Once I began reporting this illegal idling through the Citizens Air Complaint Program, silence. The engine went off, and the issue was solved, just like that. That is democracy in action. My dad and I are not alone. More than 900 New Yorkers participate in the Citizens Air Complaint Program. Together, our complaints have resulted in more than 70 million in paid fines into the city's budget. But much more importantly, our collective effort has caused drivers to change their behavior and turn off their engine. The statistics cannot capture when the engines don't idle, but I can tell you firsthand that we are making a difference. In a city where air pollution causes 3,000 deaths per year and 3,600 hospital visits per year, just from asthma alone, we are helping lower the city's healthcare costs as well. As you continue your work, please remember me and my dad. We are two examples of how democratizing enforcement of our laws works well. Multiply this by the number of participants we have, and that's a lot of wins for the people, city, and environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Hayden Brockett, and I'm a father, a husband, a union member, and a lawyer. I also volunteer as part of the nonprofit New York Clean Air Collective. And today with my colleagues, Sarah and Jonathan, I'm here to do three things. First, offer the commission a shining example of democratic people power in action. Second, encourage the commission to consider additional areas of civilian enforcement of our quality of life and environmental laws, up to and including a department of civilian enforcement. And three, present an important cautionary tale about budget transparency, which is the subject tonight, I know. First, as you've already heard, that example of people power, that is democracy in action. More than 900 people, and it's actually up to 2,500 these days. Ordinary people participate in the Citizens Air Complaint Program. They enforce the environmental laws against illegal idling by trucks and buses and by dust pollution caused by trash and construction companies that are not being enforced and have not been enforced for 50 years by the city agencies. This is an important democratic check of people's power against city agencies that have grown complacent. And it obviously only is affecting companies that are polluting our air right now by violating the air code or the noise code. And the CACP works because it properly incentivizes participation by awarding 25% of the fines collected to each complainant. And so when the city faces a climate crisis and multiple air quality emergencies every year from smoke and from just the poor air quality we suffer from every day, this program represents about 95% of the air code enforcement and $70 million lifetime city. So second, the commission should consider expanding this model of civilian enforcement to other quality of life laws. Double parking is deadly, yet it goes widely unenforced. Littering and trash are epidemics in our city, but this Department of Sanitation cannot be everywhere. There are bills before the City Council right now to encourage similar models of civilian enforcement for the traffic laws, and we would suggest that the commission should even consider creating a Department of Civilian Enforcement. And finally, let me talk about budget transparency, because the CACP does increase city revenues. For every dollar that is paid as a reward to the citizen reporter, the city collects at least $3 to $4 more in revenue. So in and of itself, it's a huge revenue positive, even before you account for the program's lowering of environmental and associated health and hospital costs, which are, of course, the real environmental goal of our environmental laws. Unfortunately, the Department of Environmental Protection, which is the agency that reviews citizen complaints, does not receive any of the fine revenues. As a result, this program is effectively an unfunded mandate for DEP, which has to review citizen complaints and receives no extra funds to implement it. I personally, along with others, have testified at multiple city council hearings to try to fix this, but the commissioner and Chair Gennaro both are restrained, let's put it that way, by policies that I'm sure are well-intentioned, but prevent them from using these important revenues to make the program work better, as Jonathan talked about. So I just want to direct also Commissioner Garrido's attention to the fact that this is also a worker justice issue. DEP's employees get a huge chunk of the credits because they review these civilian complaints. Again, 95% of all air code enforcement in the city is done by civilians reporting these things to the DEP. Those employees deserve fair compensation for this very serious work. And so I would ask this commission, as it does its important work, to consider additional flexibility to align our enforcement priorities like the CACP with the budgetary policies to make sure that the funds go to the places they need to go.
Thank you. Any questions for the? So we have one question. So what is the charter relevance of this, right? In your opinion, which one of the proposals would require a referendum? If none, what do you think the Charter Revision Commission is an appropriate vehicle for change you are requesting?
So I think the issue, I want to be delicate about this, is the fact that there needs to be the right amount of flexibility for the city council and for the mayor to direct the revenue from a program like this to then improve the revenue, the program itself. But my concern obviously is that there are, good reasons for the budget to direct all funds into the budget policies, to direct all the funds into the general fund, right? But this is an example of how there needs to be additional flexibility to where a department that doesn't, like the DEP, doesn't get saddled with an unfunded mandate that makes it do more work without getting additional funding. And as we've had this back and forth with the city council multiple times, with the DEP commissioner, they sort of get this look on their eyes that where they can't say that and they don't say, and I'm the one saying, not them, that OMB does not permit them to take into account the reality of the fact that they're getting more work and not enough funding to make that work happen. So I can't speak to the specifics of which particular proposal would address that. I want to raise this issue because I do think it really matters that you've got a very successful program that is democratizing our law enforcement that isn't because of certain current policies, isn't able to take advantage of those revenues to make the program work even better. What we want is a virtuous cycle where civilian enforcement ramps up, illegal activity goes down. And what that doesn't work because if there's not enough money to make sure that that civilian enforcement is effective. Jonathan mentioned right now, if you file a complaint, it takes about 400 days for that complaint to go to a hearing. That doesn't disincentivize a polluter to change their behavior because who can remember what they did 40 days ago, let alone 400 days ago? The way to solve that is to make sure that the DEP can efficiently move that program and make it work well so that the complaints get out there and people change their behavior. And the last step is to make sure that the DEP has the resources that it needs. So we're here to advocate for the DEP and the DEP employees and the city council. I'm not going to say anyone particular on the city council, but the process of the city council committees to be able to address these individual budgetary issues. So I know that was a long-winded,
Thank
answer,
you.
but I
Thank
hope that clarifies why we're here. Thank you.
Any questions from the commissioners online? Okay.
Can I
Yeah, sure,
just,
please, go ahead.
this is purely curiosity here. So because if I go by a speed camera and it catches my license plate, it sends me a ticket in the mail like right away.
Yeah.
Is the reason why it takes 400 days is because what's being provided is not like a city speed camera shot of your license plate, but an individual citizen shot of your license plate, and then they have to investigate it?
It's really a resource issue. We've been told that by the
Because
Just to echo Hayden, resource issue. When when anyone submits a complaint, you're I don't know the exact penal law, but you are saying that under a Class A misdemeanor, everything you are saying is true and accurate, and they will prosecute if you do make a false statement.
So the time lag is the investigation because it didn't come just from like a cop or the speed camera.
And the evidence that's required by the DEP is if it's not adjacent to a park or school, a 3+ minute video of the vehicle idling, which is with a timestamp, which is not pretty clear, which is very clear and is hard evidence of the violation.
Because we've been told specifically by the DEP commissioner, he's testified a number of times that it is a resources issue, and we believe him. He has a number of people who are spending, I think it's like 12 people who are spending full time reviewing these videos. It's 3 minutes. They need to review it. That's great. That if they could expand it to, if they could pay those people more, that would be wonderful. They deserve to be paid more. And if they could increase that head count, I think what would happen is you could have enough increase in complaints so that the behavior would change, and then it would naturally, you can't get to that virtuous cycle because you're sort of throttled by the fact that only a dozen people are reviewing these complaints as their full-time job. That's wonderful, but there should be more of them. And the DEP can't come to the powers that be and ask for money. So we have to come to the powers that be and say, give them some flexibility. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. Thank you. So we have panel 6, which is Christopher Leon Johnson. He is on the Zoom.
Okay. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Yeah, hello. Hello. My name is Christopher Leon Johnson. I'm at the Brooklyn Children's Museum for an event. So I'm here to speak on the budget. So this is my opinion about the budget, right? So my opinion about the budget is that, look, there needs to be a real transparency and a real audit into the New York City Comptroller's office, because this controller, Brad Lander, has not done his job in the past 3 years as the controller. He was busy campaigning for mayor, which he promised not to run for mayor, but he promised he ran for mayor anyway. So going forward, I'm calling on this charter to really mandate that the controller, the next income controller, could be Brandon, Parker, Malavov, or Levine, to be transparent on what time they're going to start working and what time they end their job every day. If it's 9 to 5, 9 to 5, say 9 to 5. If it's 10 to 6, 10 to 6, 11 to 7, 11 to 7. Or if they want to say 8 to 4, 8 to 4. But they need to be transparent about what they're doing with their job as a controller of the city of New York, because I think the city knows that We just seen that our controller been campaigning on government time for the past 3.5 years. So this need to be stopped with the next controller coming in, and I hope this charter commission really change this charter to where the commissioner of the commissioner to New York is be transparent on being publicly must make his schedule public, their schedule public. The controller of New York must make their schedule public of what time they're gonna be working and what time they close, because they get caught doing anything they're not supposed to do during their time, they should be able to be fined, censured, or even expelled from their office. Second, going forward, that the city council need to allocate. We need this charter to really amend this budget to help out the Liberistas and put that Liberista hub outside City Hall. Not only we need to put that Liberista hub outside City Hall, we need to make sure that we need to allocate $4 billion into NYCHA for this budget or next year's budget. The same NYCHA, we need to put $4 billion into the budget, into this budget. Let's go put it up. So going forward, like I said, that's why I got, and one more thing, I have a minute left. Like I said, this charter need to be amended to really start checking the New York City Controller's Office with this budget and what they're doing with the budget. Because like I said, for the past 3 years, this controller, Brad Lander, has not done his job as a controller of the city of New York. So we need, like I said, we don't know nothing going to happen because he's on his way out the door as the control, because he's technically not term limited, but he's running for another seat. He's not going to win. But this next income controller, they need to be transparency with this controller office. The budget relies within the controller's office. I understand that the mayor has his budget team with the mayor's office for budget, but we work for the mayor. At least we know who they work for. But the controller is an elected position, an independent position, which is elected by the people. And this charter need to amend to where the controller's office is transparent. Is audited, can be audited by the people and audited by the city council at any time they want, and a petition can be made to audit the controller's office. So thank you. I gotta go back to party. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. If not, thank you. And that ends our testimony for today. I just want to remind everyone the next hearing is on Monday, May 19th at John Jay College in Manhattan. It will be focusing on government accountability. All hearings are from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. and folks are invited to testify either in person or via Zoom. Registration and the further details of all hearings are on our website, www.thecommission.nyc. I'd like to thank everybody who testified today, watch online or in person, and the commission staff who organized this hearing. Please note that if you are unable to testify today due to time constraints, you can submit written testimony of any length up to 72 hours after the meeting concludes. Please send your testimony to info@thecommission.nyc. Are there any questions or other business of the commissioners before we adjourn for today?